We made it to conference play. It's the final week of September, and things are just starting to heat up in the college women's volleyball world. We had a match on ABC during the regular season, and albeit it was a week filled with lopsided results, it was still a fun in-state battle bonanza as we welcome you back to Six Rotations presented by SNA Sports. Better equipment for a better game. Mick Haley, Daniel Gilman with you here on the final week of September, and we're wrapping up the final week of non-con play. And Mick, right before we get to the top 5 and the top 10 and the top 25 and everything that follows it, what did you get? What were your biggest takeaways from a fun week of scheduling to have all those Wednesday jumped up matches and a lot of fun action that finished with the Nebraska sweeping through a couple very quality teams in Kentucky and Louisville?
Yeah, prime time for volleyball, didn't you think? I thought volleyball got a huge boost. In fact, during the football games on Saturday, they were announcing the Nebraska game on Sunday. That's never been heard from, and I loved watching Louisville in the Yum Center with a 14,000 seat crowd. That was really great entertainment. I just think the fans are coming out. People are excited. These conference starts now are real interesting, and I think the polls are real interesting. But we've got a lot of teams in different positions that are going to change, I think.
So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at to kick off our rankings and really kind of dive in to what we see in front of us here. And as we look at the top teams, 60 of the 61 first place votes, Pat, going to Pittsburgh, and you know what a strong result. Pittsburgh sweeps Penn State on Wednesday, survives any upset-minded effort on Sunday night. And then Nebraska sitting at 2. They got 1 first place vote. They jumped from 5 to 2. Of course, the dominance from the Cornhuskers. And then you see Stanford behind and Louisville in that 5 spot. Do you feel like the voters got it right here? I will say there was our voting system has come out as well with the media votes. And Nebraska also finished in the 2 spot. It was a unanimous from the Volleyball Magazine Super 16 poll that we'll show you in a little bit here. So Pittsburgh number 1, I think they deserve it.
Well, they haven't lost a set yet, Daniel. So yeah, I think they certainly do deserve it. And they played 4 quality matches in this top 20 matches in this first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. And I think Nebraska is definitely number 2, and they've challenged themselves. They've played 6 quality matches. They're both scoring at a tremendously high rate, 19.8 points per set for Pittsburgh and 18.28 points per set for Nebraska. And the way I look at it, that's the top 2. I mean, there's no challenge there right now. The next thing I look at is the next 6 that I have, and I think the voters got this right. The coaches got this right. The next 6 are the next 6, but I can't tell you we should just put them in a bottle and shake them and pour them out, because their numbers are almost identical. Their competition has been almost identical as far as quality. So I think you can come up with any position. I didn't have them like the voters had them, but I had all 8 of those teams right there in the top 8. So it's just a matter of where you want to put them.
Yeah, taking a look at the rest of the top 10, obviously you got Creighton, who had a really big weekend, Mick. They went to Lawrence, they took down Purdue, they took down Kansas. Neither of those matches really were that even. It looked like Creighton was certainly the better team in both of the matches. Then Wisconsin at the 7 spot. They will kick off conference play against Minnesota on Wednesday. We've got some great conference action to start our week. Penn State, Purdue, UCF, Kansas, and Arizona State, TCU in a pair of Big 12 matchups on ESPNU. Miami and Florida State will also tangle on Wednesday. SMU, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech over the weekend, Stanford, Louisville on Sunday. So that's going to be a marquee one. And let's talk a little bit about those 2 teams, because it's the Cardinal and the Cardinals. They were both roasted by Nebraska. Stanford got to 22 points. I think Louisville might have gotten to 20. Louisville set that record, as you mentioned, in the KFC Yum Center with over 14,000 fans against the Huskers. And I think it's looking like Nebraska could be primed to make that trip down there in mid to late December. December. Nebraska will take on UCLA and USC. But let's focus in. Stanford, Louisville. I want you to break down what you're seeing from each of those two teams.
Well, Stanford has been really good at scoring. They have scored really well. They're at about 17.5 points per set. They're 14.5 kills per set, except against the top teams. And the top teams they're both having trouble getting their both left sides to score. So Louisville is even having more trouble. They are producing almost 17 points per set, 16.8, but they're only getting 13, little less than 13 kills per set, and Stanford's a kill and a half more than that per set, and Louisville's had the same problem against the top two teams. So I think this is going to be a tremendous match. I think you can flip a coin on these two teams. I give Stanford the edge simply because they're scoring the ball better than Louisville, but Louisville is trying to do some different things, and I think they'll get better during the season. I don't see where Stanford's going to get better, so it's really interesting to me to watch this right now.
Good point. Then we mentioned Kansas and Purdue both playing on Wednesday, the 9 and the 10 spots. I do want to say two things. We had our giveaway last week. We wanted to see how many sets our 3 matches would go to, and nobody guessed 10 because it was a sweep from Nebraska over Stanford. It was a sweep from Pittsburgh over Penn State, and then Louisville dropped the third set in an awesome set to Kentucky, took it in 4. There were some good sets over the week. There was an awesome Texas-Baylor second set. It was 24-23 and a great set point won by Texas. Texas ends up sweeping through Baylor. But we'll try to do another giveaway here coming up maybe next week to see who can win some cool 6 rotation apparel. One more thing, if there is any sort of audio glitching or technical issues in this episode, want to send our apologies ahead of time. I'm in the middle of a move, and they have not installed the Wi-Fi yet in my new place. So we're dealing on hotspot connections. Hopefully we can kind of get through this episode without too much issue. But Mick, let's go ahead and power through and get to the rest of our poll. So you've seen the 1 through 10. Now we look at the rest of it, the whole top 25 to boot here. Miami jumps in and replaces Arkansas as the Canes swept the Razorbacks. That's the only adjustment in the poll. But how about Tennessee? Tennessee drops from 15 to 20. They were upset by Wofford early in the week, a Monday night matinee to start the week. Mary Emily Morgan goes for 18 kills. Tennessee almost gets the reverse sweep. Wofford gets their first ever top 25 win, but then Tennessee bounces back to beat Western Michigan behind Nina Kajic. Do you see this, Mick? 42 kills from Nina Kajic. She hit 500 for the Volunteers. They sit in the 20 spot. I want to open up the SEC conversation here because you've got Kentucky, Florida, Texas in the top 10, but outside that top 10, it's just Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee that represent the SEC here.
Yeah, I think actually Tennessee maybe going to drop down a little bit farther. I think they had a good match there against Western Michigan, a good MAC team, Mid-America Conference team that's playing really well. But I do think it's Florida and Texas and anybody else that shows up. Kentucky is a good team. They're having trouble scoring and they're giving up points. Like Craig Shermer's team have never given up this many points. They're almost at 9 gives per set. So if they fix that and they get their offense going a little bit more, they're in the top 3 there. But I don't know. The ACC has stepped up with the addition of the new teams and some people coming up. So SEC is interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's certainly not looking like a powerhouse conference, albeit the ACC on the flip side. You see these new look teams and, of course, SMU, who is now in the top 25 and looking like a mainstay. They're going to match up with Georgia Tech. But I think, as we look at all of the conferences, everyone looking up to the Big Ten Conference and, of course, adding Oregon and adding USC and the additions of Washington. I think Washington is a sleeper. They haven't lost a match yet, although they have not jumped in to the top 25. They are the 26th team in the AVCA Coaches Poll. Meanwhile, I am curious in your opinion about the Big 12. Where does that really sit? Are we going to learn a lot this week? Because can Kansas stand tall? They did beat Purdue, so that was a big time win for the Jayhawks. And Kansas will match up with UCF in their second season. You've got TCU. Arizona State is a team that has an early test on Wednesday, Mick. They're going to take on Baylor on Friday. And then Arizona State's got TCU on Wednesday. Where do you feel like the Big 12 is really handling themselves?
I think you're going to see a lot of upsets in the Big 12. There are a lot of even teams, with the exception of Kansas, which is doing two things really well, and they've only been stopped by Creighton. Creighton just put the lid on both Purdue and Kansas this weekend as far as their scoring. They were both scoring really well up until the time they ran into Creighton. But Kansas scores at almost 19 points per set. And the most impressive thing to me is Ray Bouchard's team is not only giving up about 6.5 points per set. That really puts them in a great situation, especially when they play home at that smaller facility. That really gives them an advantage. I look for them to win the conference, but I'll tell you what, SMU, TCU, I'm sorry, not SMU, but TCU, Baylor, Arizona State, all of those teams can beat each other on any given night. And so home advantage is maybe going to be a big thing in the Big 12, and how they travel is maybe going to be a big thing. I think the Big 12 might be fun to watch this year.
I have no doubts. I think it will be one of the more exciting conferences, but it all kind of comes back to the Big Ten. And as we take a look at kind of the top teams in the conference, I am curious to hear your prognostication. If you can give me your top 7 for the Big Ten conference, Mick, and we can kind of talk it out together if we want to. But I do feel like the Big Ten is the deepest. We might get upwards of 12, 13 teams that could be right on that bubble. But, Nebraska's far and away number 1. I think Penn State has kind of locked themselves into a 2 spot, with Wisconsin maybe 3. And do you think Purdue is 4? Who do you kind of think filters out after that? Minnesota will have a fun week as the Golden Gophers take on Purdue after Wisconsin in a back-to-back knuckle down. And then obviously we'll learn a lot about USC and UCLA, but I don't think they're good enough for me to kind of put them in that top 7, top 8 conversation.
I think I don't see it that way. I think the Big Ten's in trouble. I like Nebraska first. I still think Wisconsin's going to end up being second. I think you've got Penn State third. Purdue, we don't know about because they didn't schedule this preseason like they normally do. And they're relying on both left side hitters for their point scoring. So I look at the Big Ten as the top 3, and I think Wisconsin's talent will get them back up there in that position to challenge Nebraska at 2. But I don't think they're going to beat Nebraska, but I think they can challenge Nebraska. And I think Penn State is good, but I don't know that they can score the way you need to. They play really well at home. But freshman setter, Wisconsin's got a freshman setter. Nebraska's experienced. So I like those 3. I would say Purdue 4 right now, but I run out of teams. I have Minnesota as a potential, but they just haven't done it yet. So then I don't think UCLA is good right now. I think USC could be good. They're still trying to figure out how to reduce errors, but they have talent. So they could get in the hunt there. And then I don't like Oregon right now. Oregon's not scoring the ball either. So as much as you like the Big Ten, I'm having trouble figuring out how those teams are going to elevate themselves because they haven't done it in the pre-conference season.
Well, we did see Sarah Franklin absolutely ball out against Marquette last week, a 4-set win. She had 33 kills, which is the second most in a 4-setter in Wisconsin history. Meanwhile, a few other notable scores from last week. And you talk about, the Creighton, Purdue, Kansas. Creighton came out on top there. Kansas beat Purdue as well. It was a great 4th set between Creighton and Purdue, 27-25. Meanwhile, BYU, they're in the Big 12. They're a team that I picked to win the Big 12 early. I think Kansas is looking like the aggressors now, but BYU survived a 5-set thriller on Wednesday against Utah State. Meanwhile, Stanford took down Kentucky late at night. I think it was like a 2 a.m. Eastern time finish. Kentucky won that 3rd set 30-28. in a fun one. How about the Gators? The Gators got Alexis Stuckey back, their All-American setter, and beat Florida State in 5 sets on Tuesday. We're going to learn a lot about Florida against Kentucky on Sunday, aren't we?
Yeah, and that's why I keep Florida up there, because I think their talent is good enough to really play in that top 12. But right now they're not there. I put them up there because of talent, and I'm looking at the other teams and I'm trying to figure out where they're going to get their points. And I see more points coming for Florida. I don't see more points coming from other teams right now. So that's why I say, talking about the Big Ten and then the SEC, there's the big three in both of those conferences. But after that, I'm waiting for somebody to step up. And I don't see how you're going to get 7 Big Ten teams in the tournament. Honestly, I know they've got a lot of teams in that conference, but if I look at my 25, I've only got 4 or 5 Big Ten teams in the top 25, which is extremely unusual, right?
Yeah.
But there are several programs that are down. I mean, Ohio State's down, Illinois is down. Some of those teams that are always there are down, and Iowa's down. Indiana is getting beat by teams they probably shouldn't get beat by. Maryland and Rutgers are out there. So I don't know where they're going to get teams that show up here and start beating people, unless it's Washington, unless it's Oregon.
Illinois,
Those are the
Illinois is
kinds of
looking
things
pretty
we
good
have
as
to figure
well.
out.
Yeah, Illinois is looking decent. Washington hasn't lost a game. I'm curious to kind of see how that goes. Meanwhile, the SEC, do you see this, Mick? You hear about this? You see this? They're making a big announcement. First ever Power 5 volleyball tournament starts next year in Savannah for the SEC. That's going to be a lot of fun. It feels like a lot of downside for some of the teams like Florida, like Texas, but certainly upside for some of those Georgias that can hang around the middle, maybe in Oklahoma or Texas A&M that can try to work themselves into the pool.
Yeah, I think we had heard before there was a hint that the SEC was going to have a tournament. There's a hint that the Big Ten is talking, Big Ten is talking about a tournament. Big 12, I think, will have a tournament, but they haven't said that yet. I don't know what the ACC is going to do, but as many teams as they have in their conference, a tournament certainly would be exciting. And you talk about television, if you start putting 14,000 in for regular season games, television wants the tournament. They want those tournaments, especially just before Thanksgiving or just after Thanksgiving. And I think you're going to see the Big Four conferences go to tournaments pretty soon, if not 25, 26 in there for sure.
I totally agree. Leave it to the SEC. They were the ones that started it in the football side of things. It was Alabama that beat Florida. And I think it was 1990 that kickstarted the conference championship for football. Here they are setting the tone for volleyball. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the Super 16 Power 16 Volleyball Magazine poll. And yep, a very similar look with Stanford 3, Louisville just over Penn State, Creighton there at 6. These, of course, are voted upon by you and I and a handful of other esteemed colleagues and pickers, and you can find that all on Volleyball Magazine and their website. Florida, I picked them a little bit higher. I had them more in that 12 spot, like you said, more on potential than their results recently, but Minnesota creeping in there in that 16 spot. I had a couple people that I wanted to give a lot of respect to and credit to, so I did. I put TCU in my 16th spot. I also have Florida State creeping in as well, and a Florida State team that will be tested. There's no doubt about that in the ACC. What do you think about the top 16 that we had voted?
I like the top 16. I thought the 16 were the same teams that I voted for, that they came out with this morning, and certainly we're seeing it the same. I think there's a group of teams from 16 to 22, maybe 16 to 24. That group of teams could move up or down depending on what kind of conference schedule they have and who they get to play against here. I could see a lot of movement in the polls every week, just simply by who beats whom. And so I think the polls might be a lot of fun. I wouldn't think we're going to change much on top. I mean, I see the ACC having a chance for upsets. Pittsburgh might get tired here of beating everybody 3-0, but everybody's going to be gunning for them, so they just get to get better, which is just really worrisome for anybody else going to the Final Four. So I think there's a lot of people that think they can sneak into the top four here to get in the tournament. I don't think there's many people that think they can be one or two.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up with some fun shout outs. There were a lot of records set in the last few weeks. UNLV had their first ever sellout and first ever win against Hawaii. Portland State set a new record crowd against Oregon. Meanwhile, Stanford set a record crowd with almost 7,000 against Texas. And then notable performances. How about North Alabama? They swept Alabama for their first SEC win since 1986. And Princeton's Cameron Chaney put together the best Ivy League performance in a decade with 34 kills against High Point. Lastly, your girl Melanie Parra, first ever AVCA back-to-back Player of the Week. She averaged over 7 kills per set. Now, Mick, if you had to pick one big upset coming up this weekend, you think Georgia Tech has a chance against Pitt? Would Louisville Stanford be considered an upset, or could one of our LA sides topple Nebraska? What's a big upset pick for you this weekend?
I think the best match is Louisville Stanford. That's the one that intrigues me the most. I think there are some other matches, though. The Miami Florida State match will be a match of battling in Florida like you've never seen. I saw Miami beat Texas at Texas, and I was stunned. They reminded me of Washington State a year ago when they came into Texas and did the same thing, but they were good. I love to watch Kentucky and Florida go at it, because that's just I mean, there's no love there. They're just going to go in there and play as hard as they can. And I think the Penn State Purdue match should be interesting, and the Purdue Minnesota match should be interesting. Purdue's got 2 matches this weekend. If you're Boilermaker, you don't want to miss either of these, because I think both of these matches are good, and that's back to back for Purdue, and they just got spanked at Kansas 2 nights in a row. They're not going to be very happy going these matches this week. So that would be one I would tune in for and keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, certainly. You mentioned that Miami, Florida State, they're going to play on Wednesday and on Saturday. Wednesday will be in Tallahassee. Saturday will be in Coral Gables. So a chance for those two to get off to a great or a poor start in the ACC. We can't wait to bring it all to you. Check in for the next episode next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. And email us at sixrotations@gmail.com with any thoughts, questions, or fun tidbits that you can come up with. But as always, he's Mick. I'm Daniel, and this is 6 Rotations.